Welcome, everybody. This is an interesting panel. This is the panel on measuring transparency. And I'm going to say I'm Helen Derbyshire from Access Info Europe. I'm also a civil society representative on the steering committee of the Open Government Partnership. And I'm representing perhaps more than anything the Access to Information community, which is the community that I've worked with over the last couple of decades, promoting the right of access to information. And the objective of this panel is to talk about how we better measure transparency, the right of access to information in law and in practice. And it's totally impossible to do that in 50 minutes. So we're not really going to try. What we're going to try to do is to hit on some of the key things that we need to be working on. And what I'm going to ask the panelists to do in the briefest of interventions, so that we can also take questions and comments from the room. We've only got 46 minutes left now because we've already started. Is just to answer, and I'll pass the microphone along, I'll ask you each to just say briefly who you are and to say what you're doing to measure transparency and what we should be doing as part of the Open Government Partnership, but really in a minute 30 seconds per person. And then we can see how the conversation goes. Laura and I have just had a fantastic session on does the OGP encourage access to information light? And I think the conclusion was yes, it does. And that we need to strengthen access to information within OGP. From the meeting we just had, which had a very rich collection of government officials and information commissioners, as well as civil society, I would say that the conclusion was we need stronger eligibility criteria, and we need stronger measuring of progress, not just the laws on paper, but very much access to information in practice, as well as peer learning, exchanges of best practice, and so forth. So this is clearly a very important issue. It's an issue which is absolutely core if we're going to be talking about open government. We have to have this right of access to information respected. But how on earth do we actually measure that? How do we know where we stand in this world of access to information? So I'm going to start with Alejandro. You work with the World Justice Project. And maybe you could just say very briefly what you're doing and what you think we should be doing or could be doing better. Thanks.
Thank you, Helen. In my view, what we should be doing, and I'm going to start with that, with what we should be doing, is measuring how just whether people indeed can access information from the government, right? With all the constraints that we know and that we understand very well. But in practice, whether people can access information from the government. So how do we do that? I think that we need to keep in mind 3 criteria. Number 1 is measuring the experiences of the people. Number 2 is to have a comprehensive approach. And number 3 is to present the results in a very simplified way, easy to understand for the public. So now, obviously, this presents enormous challenges. There are no single measurement tool that can indeed provide a sole measure. So that's why it is useful to coordinate efforts. So let me just give you an example. So let's assume that—
Very briefly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just one simple example. So let's assume that I'm interested in just requesting budget figures or understanding budget figures. So one approach will be simply someone to ask about it and see what the experience of that person is. That approach will give us the answer that we're looking for. However, that approach probably is not going to give us, if a government is interested in knowing, so what are the most common requests of information, or what is what the public are looking online. So that approach will not give that to us. So we will need to look at the request of information. We will need to just survey the public, which is something that we do at the World Justice Project. We have interviewed about 100,000 people on these topics. And then in the end, combine all the different approaches to have a comprehensive picture.
Wonderful, thanks. I think that's probably going to be one of the conclusions coming out of this session, that we probably need multiple complementary tools. Carlos Iglesias from the World Wide Web Foundation, you've been working on the Open Data Barometer, which is the proactive dimension. Could you just very briefly tell us what you're doing, but also what you think we should be doing and how that fits into this puzzle of multiple complementary tools. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, basically, the Open Data Barometer is a comprehensive tool for the assessment of the state of the play of open data policies and practice all around the world. We were covering more than 90 different countries all around the globe in the last edition, and we keep expanding. And in the current edition we are working, which is the 4th, we plan to cover more than 110. And I think that for the future, I think that 3 concepts are key, basically. One is, well, the first question is what we should be measuring. I mean, I think that's a tough question itself, because, I mean, if you ask, it depends on who you ask to. I mean, basically, the first question is what is open data exactly? Because, I mean, we have the Sevastopol principles, we have the open definition, we have the G20 anti-corruption open data principles, we have the G8 principles, and so many others. So for us, it is really important to have some sort of common foundation we can be relying on, and this is for us where the International Open Data Charter plays a very important role, because that's the way we could have a common vision of what open data really means, and that's not only important for implementation, but also for measurement. The second concept is completeness. I mean, we need to include not only the outputs in the measurement. I mean, it's not only about what data is available, but also the full ecosystem. That's what we need to be including in the measurement. I mean, open data is not only about the data that is available, it's about the readiness of the government to prepare that data and to make that data available to the public. It's also about the readiness of the society just to be able to use that data, and we include all that components in our measurement as well. So the measurement needs to be complete. And the third concept is basically transparency in what we do and how we do it. I mean, we need to be more transparent, be transparent about the indicators we use, be transparent about the methods we use, and be open to everyone, be transparent also about the data. I mean, eat our own dog food and publish also all our indicators, all our results from the multiple studies we do in an open way. So I think those are the 3 main elements.
Thank you. Fantastic. And we'll probably come back to a couple of those points. I'm going to keep the microphone moving down right now to continue getting these quality contributions. Ernesto Belisario, from working in Italy on the open government partnership commitments in Italy, you'd actually proposed a panel as well, which we combined with this one. And you really wanted to know, you wanted to hear from the other experts about what we should be doing. But maybe you can tell us what you think or what you'd like to hear more about in terms of guidance.
Yes, thank you, Ellen. And as you know, I am a lawyer, and I was the promoter of the Freedom of Information Act coalition in Italy, FOIA for Italy. And after the adoption of our first Freedom of Information Act in 2016, I became a member of the Open Government Partnership team. And so I want to take the opportunity of this panel, and I want to answer your question, what we have to do now. First, we have to learn from the past and from our mistakes. In Italy, in the first monitoring study testing access to information laws was conducted only in 2013 by an Italian NGO named Diritto di Sapere. And the lesson learned, the lesson I learned from this fact was that if something is not measured, if something is not monitored by public administration and by government, is not important for public administration and for government. So we have to learn from this mistake, and so we have to project a monitoring system that really works. Second,
can I just clarify that point? Are you saying that the government themselves should be doing the monitoring, or it's okay, it's enough for civil society to do it?
Both.
Both, okay?
I think
that's important.
one part is important for the government and for civil society, both. And later maybe I'll explain you what we are thinking about. And second, we have to study from other experiences, so the OGP context is really important in order to do that. And third, we have to collaborate at the national level and at international level as OGPS.
Thanks, fantastic. Pass the microphone to Laura. Laura, Carlos mentioned, Laura Newman from the Carter Center and leading the Access to Information Working Group of OGP. Laura, one of the things that Carlos mentioned is the readiness of government to be transparent, not only the sort of what we see from the outside, but what we know about the inside. You've done a lot of work on that. Maybe you want to comment on it,
okay,
or anything else.
Yes, hi everyone. So everyone's been talking about implementation the past few days. Helen and I and others have been talking about it, Carol, for decades, because we realize that passing a law is really insufficient. You absolutely need it to be implemented. And so very misguidedly, I thought, well, how hard could it be to come up with some indicators to see how well a government is implementing their access to information law? Well, 6 years later, maybe now 7, and 15 countries later, many of which were part of a pilot series, I think we've got a set of about 50 indicators, which really does look at the extent and quality of an agency's implementation. And I put some emphasis on the word agency because I think we're making a mistake by thinking that you can judge or rank or identify implementation as an aggregate by government. Because governments don't implement these laws, agencies do. And one agency may be doing phenomenally while another agency has done nothing. So which one do you look at to determine implementation at a country level? I do think there's a few indicators that we're starting to think about that might look at a more overall picture, like our annual reports being done, because those are already aggregates. I'm also just want to throw in addition to our implementation assessment tool, which, as I said, we've done in about 15 countries, there's a lot of talk about compliance, kind of a conflation between what is implementation and what is compliance. And those are, in my mind, two very different things. Implementation is the activity that a government does, an agency does, to put into effect, to operationalize, in this case, their access to information law. Compliance is whether they then do what they're supposed to do. They may have all those skills in place, but are they being responsive? And we've heard a lot of people in the last days talk about, well, let's count how many requests they're responding to. But an agency can very easily respond to every single request in 24 hours by saying no. And still that's full compliance. So I think we need to really think about some of the terminologies that we're using, not only why are we measuring, which somebody mentioned, but also who are we measuring and what are we measuring? So we need to ask a lot of those questions as we think through measurements around any kind of transparency initiative.
Thank you very much, Laura. I think that we're making our job harder and harder with each speaker because we're getting more complex and multi-layered within government, but these are very important points. If we're really going to have a true understanding of how open our governments, our governance systems are. Now, it's not only the Open Government Partnership which is concerned about measuring, because also we have in the Sustainable Development Goals, we have 16.10.2, which talks about access to information, and every SDG should have measurement against its indicators. So I'm very pleased that we have here today 2 representatives from UNESCO, which is charged with that particular indicator, Faxon Banda and Marius Lucasunas, if I've said that right. I think I missed a vowel there, but anyway. So I'd very much like to hear, we've been having discussions with you at UNESCO about what the indicators might be. Tell us a bit how it's going and what you think, and maybe how we can collaborate between these different communities. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to place the discussion, within the discourse of sustainable development, because we know that governments have come together to make a decision about how far they're going to go in terms of releasing information and engaging with the public in order to promote open government. And so within the SDGs framework, there is a specific target, which is about public access to information and protecting fundamental freedoms. It's important to link the two, and UNESCO does that in its approach towards this. But also it is important to actually specify what what this target says. It says to ensure public access to information in accordance with national legislation and international standards. I think it's important that we understand how these two speak to what UNESCO is doing. So in trying to approach this particular indicator, to measure the target 1610, and the specific wording is number of countries that adopt and implement constitutional, statutory, and or policy guarantees for access to information. Now, looking at that, what UNESCO has done, working together with others within the Access to Information Network, is to develop 3 questions. The first one is very fundamental, the simplest of all, one that you can gather data on using desk research. Has a country adopted national guarantees for public access to information? Yes, no. Is it reflected in the Constitution? Does it appear in subsidiary legislation, and so on and so forth? The second question, to what extent do these national guarantees reflect international standards? Now remember that I said that the exact wording of target 1610 speaks about in accordance with national legislation and international standards. So it is important that in some way we ensure that national legislation on public access to information, if possible, is subservient to international standards, international norms that the international community has agreed upon. And I think that gives us an opportunity to assess the quality of such laws, because you can ask questions in relation, for example, to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in relation to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, in relation to the European Convention on Human Rights, and yes, in relation to the American Convention on Human Rights. And within those 2 regimes, you might identify specific provision that spell out the qualitative nature of legislation that addresses public access to information. So this, again, at the level of expert analysis, can bring us useful insights about what countries are doing to actualize their commitment. But the third and final question is, what then are the national mechanisms that a country has put in place to actualize its commitment? That is the implementation bit that Laura has been speaking about. And this is the one that we are engaging with now, trying to develop measures that we think could better capture it. Now, we must bear in mind the geopolitical aspects that are involved in decisions of this sort. And so whereas as civil society organization, we might come up with a wish list that truly speaks to our interests, we must also look at the political calculations that countries go through, and perhaps come with a modicum of approaches that addresses political questions as well as technical questions. And to that end, we are consulting widely, and already we have developed a series of questions that try to answer that question, and these are drawn from different efforts within this community, and the questions relate to institutional mechanisms, to systemic issues, to performance issues, and so on and so forth. And we hope that by the end of the consultation, we'll have come up with a set of questions that is sufficiently short and robust to address these questions. And we look to the community such as yours to help with that effort.
Thank you very much indeed. I don't know if, Marius, you're going to add anything to that very, very briefly, if you can, because we need to get to the end of the row and take questions.
Yeah, I'll add a few points. The first point would be that UNESCO, first time this year on the 28th of September, had celebrated the International Day of Universal Access to Information. And that day was promulgated and promoted by the UNESCO Executive Board, and now it's one of the official UN days. Why it is important? I know that the FOI community was celebrating before that the Right to Know Day, but that takes this issue to the level of the governments, and I think that is important because, especially in that context, when we are talking about access to information. Very often we are talking about access to government information. And another point I want to make when we are thinking about platforms, how FOI community and member states, how they can cooperate, one of the possible platforms would be to have a certain global legal framework. And that is usually one of the UN, would it be convention, recommendation, or in that case maybe declaration or resolution is not that important. But that kind of document, I think, would also, of course, it's again, I have to reiterate, it's purely the will of the member states to do that, but from my point of view as a private observer, that would be another possible platform of global cooperation for the governments and, of course, for civil society. We know that such document exists. It was passed, the convention was passed by the Council of Europe. I think it still needs a few votes of approval, but that could be another option. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marius. And yes, with the sort of, from the UNESCO perspective, given some of the sort of political considerations there, maybe it's this multi-stakeholder platform of OGP where we can take the lead on defining the standards, and then hopefully you can follow up so that we get some really strong standards in there. This panel's been organized, I said, by the community. I should just mention it's organized with the people on the panel, but also with the Freedom of Information Advocates Network. Toby Mendel couldn't be here, unfortunately, today, and with the regional networks, including the African Freedom of Information Center and the Alianza Regional from the Latin American region. And I'm very happy to have over there, my far left, Justine Dupuy and Marcela Restrepo, respectively working in Mexico and Colombia, who would perhaps say a couple of words. I don't know which languages you're going to speak in, whether we need translation from Spanish or at least for Marcela. Yeah. And just say a couple of words about your experiences, including at the national level, how this kind of initiative can be relevant. Thank you.
Oh, maybe I will do it in Spanish also.
Okay, put your headphones on, please.
Lo que quería compartir justo sobre la medición de transparencia es la experiencia en México. Y lo que vemos en México es que se ha, en efecto, desarrollado muchas herramientas para medir la calidad de las leyes, y gracias a eso hoy en día México tiene la mejor ley del mundo en materia de transparencia. Sin embargo, todavía nos falta mucho por hacer en medir realmente la implementación de estas leyes, porque existe una gran brecha entre estas leyes y la implementación. Y sobre la medición de la implementación, creo que quiero compartir dos puntos. Creo que la calidad, en efecto, de la información debería ser un criterio importante. Y aquí les quiero compartir una experiencia, un pequeño estudio que hicimos sobre 3,000 respuestas a solicitudes de información que analizamos, donde según el órgano de transparencia en México, el 70% ya se había compartido esta respuesta, ¿no?, sobre un universo de solicitudes de información. Y cuando se analiza este 70% a detalle, lo que ve uno es que al final solamente la mitad realmente son respuestas de calidad. Entonces creo que un criterio muy importante sería la calidad de la información. También otra cosa sería un criterio de qué tipo de información no se entrega o dónde se está cerrando también la información, porque es lo que hemos visto en México, por ejemplo, en términos de violaciones graves a derechos humanos, cuando la sociedad civil quiere acceder a información, aquí se cierra. Entonces sería otro punto fundamental también que integrar en estos estudios.
Bueno, a ver, para nosotros en Colombia ha sido fundamental medir dos aspectos centrales en relación al acceso a la información. El primero, lo que nosotros llamamos los arreglos institucionales, es decir, qué medidas, qué políticas, qué leyes surgen, digamos, del Estado colombiano para garantizar el derecho de acceso a la información. Y por otro lado, tenemos indicadores relacionados con si esas medidas se aplican. Y ahí estoy totalmente de acuerdo con Justin. Entonces tratamos de ver por qué es importante que en nuestros países, donde todavía es reciente la adopción, en el caso de Colombia vamos a cumplir el próximo año 3 años, estamos estrenando ley, es importante ver cómo esos arreglos institucionales se van expresando realmente en los diseños institucionales. Y por otro lado, entonces tenemos que ver la práctica, es decir, qué cosas nuevas y diferentes empiezan a hacer autoridades públicas y servidores públicos y sociedad civil para promover la garantía del derecho. Ahora bien, un tercer elemento que para nosotros ha sido súper importante en esta medición, en el caso nuestro, es tener en cuenta los 3 niveles territoriales. Es decir, cómo se cumple la ley en el nivel central, mal llamado nacional, en el nivel intermedio, que en el caso colombiano se llaman los departamentos, y en el nivel local, que en el caso colombiano son los municipios. Ahí vemos también fuertes diferencias en las otras 2 dimensiones, en la adopción de unos diseños institucionales favorables a la garantía del derecho y por el otro lado en la práctica. Hoy día, como nuestra ley cumple 3 años, nos estamos enfrentando a un nuevo desafío y es buscar una 4ª dimensión y es evaluar ya, digamos, cómo el acceso a la información realmente es un derecho puente para garantizar otros derechos. Entonces, nos estamos involucrando en trabajar con organizaciones de la sociedad civil que trabajan temas de víctimas o temas de transparencia en la industria extractiva o temas de derechos sociales para ver si la ley como recurso contribuye a que otros derechos se cumplan. Nuestra meta es el próximo año tener esa 4ª medición para ahí sí tener un panorama un poco más amplio entre lo importante que es un diseño institucional, lo formal y realmente cómo ese diseño institucional impacta directamente en la calidad de vida de la gente.
Thank you very much indeed, Justina and Marcela. There's some very important points there, echoing what Laura said, the quality of information, not just whether there's compliance with the laws, also this point about differences within a country, in different agencies and different levels of government. And then the 4th dimension, which is very interesting, to what extent is the information having any impact at all? I do think that's important for those of us who are advocating for access to information, because at the end of the day, we need to justify why this is so important, why this right really should be paid such attention to. So some very important points there. Very, very fast, because just formulate your questions and be ready to shoot up your hands in 30 seconds.
I just wanted to say that I'm a little concerned that we're trying to find a one study meets all issues. And I think we need to be prepared to say we're going to have lots of different studies that together might more comprehensively see how things are going. And so I worry that OGP is going to push us, or even the SDGs, into trying to find one way to measure this. And I just want to go back to why are we doing it? You know, is it to help governments to be better? Is it to make sure we reach citizens?
If you could just hold the reaction, Faxon. I know you want to come back on that, but what I'd like to do, what I propose we do, we've got 19 minutes left. I'm really sorry it's so squeezed, but we've seen this whole week has been not enough time for anything, but it's fantastic that we're all here. So I'm going to take 5 questions. You're going to have to shout them out. I'm going to start on this side and swing around. Stick your hands up. We'll shout them out, and then I'll give a round to everyone on the panel to come back. So do we have any in this section? Oh, this is going to be... Yes, gentleman at the back. Speak loudly. You saw a lady with a microphone.
I am Dauda Garuba. I am from Nigeria. I work for Natural Resource Governance Institute. This is a very important session on right to information, but I want to ask one question. Are we also assuming that even when quality information is available, the citizens are already on ground to take on those information to work with it. I come from a country where for a very long time we said we have a national oil company that was opaque, keeps all the figures to itself, and all of a sudden we had a new government that decided that on a monthly basis we are going to be having figures that speak to the earnings from the NNPC, that's our national oil company. For 1 year, August to August, and now we are in December, we've had these figures given out on a monthly basis. The citizens are not just asking questions, and you ask yourself, all the effort we put in place to fight for this access to information issues, the citizens don't even need the information because they are not even getting it. What are we doing to help citizens to also use the figures or information to hold government to account?
Thank you very much. I think the measuring and the use are complementary things, but we've got Suzanne here, Information Commissioner from Canada, would like to ask a question. And then
I would like civil society to really consider also how impactful measuring results is to advance the rights of access through the enforcement process, because when we have measures, we can actually use it to argue cases in courts, and those actually move the bar forward in terms of rights of access. And it also is very helpful when we're trying to seek amendments to our laws around the world to have the appropriate measurements. So yes, it's nice to measure, it's nice to know what the impact of access to information laws are, but don't forget that it is tremendously important as evidence to push forward on our rights to know around the world. So that's a dimension that I would really like the measurement process to consider.
Okay, thank you very much. With gentlemen over here, and yes, not only how do we measure, but how do we use the measurements once we've got them? Please.
Thank you very much. I'm Jakob. I work for the OSCE Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. We don't directly engage with access to information, but we work on a series of issues related to political participation. And my question, maybe we're talking about dimensions, to add another one that I haven't heard so much these 2 days. What about the gender access to data? Is it something that you take into consideration when you work on this? Is it just a problem of providing data that are accessible to also underrepresented genders and women, or is it's a work of making them particularly tailored for gender issues? Thank you.
Okay, what great question. Thank you very much. Claudio Cesarano from Diritto di Sapere here. I didn't see you, sir. I've got a couple more first. This gentleman here in blue.
Thank you, Ellen. I will be super quick. What do you think about those measurements, or use the approach of perception of transparency by citizens? Should we move away from that and focus on evidence, or do you think are still useful?
That might be a question from Alejandro for the rest of the panel to comment. Carol Excel from WRI.
Okay, so Carol here. So I'm really concerned that we forget about some of the conventions that deal with access to environmental information. So we have the ARUS Convention. We're developing a Latin American Regional Convention on Access to Information. The SDGs speaks to the environmental element, and we keep on leaving it out. We measured access to environmental information in the Environmental Democracy Index last year. We saw huge deficiencies. So let's not just focus on access to information laws or constitutions. Let's look at other ways at specific sector relevant information and whether we can measure impact from that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a question over here, second on the second person over there. Wait. Yeah, that was great. Très rapidement. Muy rápido, no sé en qué idioma.
Damaris Kiewicz from South Africa. I think the access to information is critical for communities because that is how you advocate and lobby. But if you're not empowered to understand data, then it will just be data. Whether it's clean data or raw data, it is just data. And I think communities, once they're capacitated, governments actually fear us. Because then we have access to parliament, because in my country, there's processes in place where we can measure the work the government says they're going to do and they are not doing. I would just like to make an example. We had an under expenditure of 16.8 billion rand in one of our sectors. And if we didn't understand that, then the communities did not know that.
Could you just keep to the point on measuring, please, just to keep a focus? Thanks.
I'm going to, but I think it is important to also hear what comes from communities, because sometimes it's made to understand that we cannot read data. But I think the point that I want to make is making data clean, clear, and understandable for communities to lobby and advocate for change.
Okay, so again, it's about the quality of the information. Perhaps this gentleman here, I cut you off earlier. If we could get the mic just back up here, one last question, and then the panel, you're each going to have 1.5 minutes to answer. So just start formulating your incredibly concise words while we listen to this gentleman.
Merci. Je peux parler français?
Oui,
Okay.
mais en anglais, ça sera mieux. Hein,
Okay, I'll try it in English. I come from Madagascar, and my question is very simple. In the OGP process, it's said that to have a good mark, only the intention to adopt a law. So I'm afraid that for my country, I speak for my country, I'm afraid that the government can just stay at the intention, because it's sufficient to have the number, the mark.
Wonderful,
What
thanks.
did you
This comes back to the eligibility
adoption of a law
criteria.
and the
Yes.
implementation of a law to have a good mark, not only the intention.
Yeah, intentions are not good enough. I think,
it's a
we
bad
can probably
message.
agree on that in terms of
It's
you
a
can't
bad
measure
message for them.
intentions very accurately
Okay,
either.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Let's start, let's go down the panel in the same way. Have you lost your microphone? Here we go.
Very quickly, just to give a short conclusion. I think that what we have seen here is the need for using multiple data sources. I think that's a lesson. I think that a lot of the questions that were asked here, just the user question, the gender question, the perception questions, to all the questions, yes, all the data are useful. The gender issue, just yes, we can obtain that information through household surveys. Perceptions, yes, they are useful when they are used in combination with other data sources. To me, OGP presents a fantastic opportunity to start a process for generating and for answering the question that we started at the beginning. What should we measuring? How should we measure it? Let's start a process to come up with an answer, to come up with an answer that includes all the different data sources and that simplifies the message of the type of indicators that can be used, that can be replicated, that can be publicized.
And Alejandro, on the point that Carlos made about transparency, because you haven't actually yet published the underlying data from your survey, which is something that some of us were concerned about, is that something you could make a commitment to do, to share it, so that we can do that, look at the data that we've got and improve our measuring?
Absolutely. Just when we're going to publish the results at the beginning of next year, and we'll make the data available.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to alternate. I'm going to go to Marcela now.
Bueno, muy breve. A ver, la evaluación que se hace de este tipo de leyes que están tan centradas en los derechos de la gente, para nosotros desde una racionalidad ciudadana es fundamental. Es decir, no lo evaluamos desde el cumplimiento formal, estoy totalmente de acuerdo con el señor, creo que ningún país debe pasar porque está cumpliendo el acceso a la información, porque tiene una ley, es decir, tenemos que involucrar un poquito más de exigencia en nuestras evaluaciones. Lo que nosotros hacemos busca desde una racionalidad ciudadana evaluar esa ley. Y como decimos en Colombia, existen las mentiras comunes y corrientes y las estadísticas. Entonces, la idea es que aquí tengamos unas mediciones lo suficientemente serias y precisas que muestren cómo el acceso a la información es realmente una vía para la garantía de los derechos humanos. Y frente al tema de la percepción versus los datos duros, los temas de percepción son importantes, nos dan un punto de vista del mundo, pero definitivamente en estos temas es cada vez más necesario involucrar datos duros en las evaluaciones, verificar, constatar y comprobar. Eso es lo que hace que avancemos de manera más seria frente a las recomendaciones con nuestros estados.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, lies, damned lies and statistics. Carlos.
Yeah, I think that the key question here is again collaboration. I mean, inequality keeps growing. I mean, the governments shift from time to time. The civic space is also even more constrained continuously and keep closing. So I think that the key is that we need to work all together to protect our openness agenda and collaborate. And that collaboration has multiple dimensions, I think. I mean, we can collaborate internally, let's call it that way. I mean, for example, in your own area of expertise, as we do with the Open Data Barometer and with Open Data specifically, we have been identifying more than 20 different studies and products trying to assess open data in different ways. So what we are doing is try to reach them, work with them through the International Open Data Charter with a specific working group we have only for measurement. And we are trying to define a sort of common framework where we can agree what are the key indicators, the definitions, and we are measuring all the same things. Again, I mean, everyone could be just focusing on different aspects of the measurement, but at least we are all in agreement.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much, Justine.
Sí, iría justamente en el sentido de la participación ciudadana. Creo que también es un criterio muy importante que tomar en cuenta qué tipo de información se necesita para alentar la participación ciudadana, y aquí comparto también las preocupaciones sobre que hay niveles diferentes de ejercicio del acceso a información, de la transparencia. En México no es lo mismo si uno pide información a un nivel federal que una persona en una comunidad que lo pide a su presidente municipal. Hay temas de violencia. Entonces, aquí también creo que sería muy importante tomar en cuenta este tipo de experiencias locales para poder medir qué tanto permea la transparencia y el acceso a la información en todos los niveles del país.
Fantastic, thank you. Ernesto.
Before collaborate, I think it's sharing. I want to share our commitment on measuring for implementation in our action plan. We are working on two systems. Our system at the institutional level, because we have in each public institution are responsible of transparency. So data collected on an annual basis by responsibles of transparency will be collected by Ministry for Public Administration. And second level, in OGP Forum, which is a multi-stakeholders forum created in third action plan, and civil society organization will organize monitoring activities. And so I want to take this opportunity in order to ask you any suggestions, because we are designing the system right now. So please feel free to contact us, www.open.gov.it. Thank you.
Fantastic and perfect minute. I think you're going to get a lot of suggestions after this panel. You may regret you asked that. Given that we're talking about community and collaboration, could I ask the two gentlemen from UNESCO to do a team wrap-up, because we're really pushed for time?
Yes, I think that the two questions from Nigeria and South Africa are interrelated. You know, how do you engage citizens to ensure that they utilize the data that is generated, the information that is given out? And I think you know, in many ways, the citizen engagement with information is a function of many factors, and we need not to lose sight of that. The educational system, for example, the awareness programs that are in place by the government regarding laws in place with respect to access to information, the economic status of the citizens, and so on and so forth. So we need to look at the demand side of access to information and perhaps invest in that by ensuring that civil society actors are fully involved in catalyzing a robust public policy debate, engaging at the community level and getting people engaged in that sense. And also, I think we can invest in the role of the media, particularly if it is a free, independent, and pluralistic media system, to ensure that it synthesizes, makes sense of the information and presents it in digestible formats. I think the question to do with gendered access to information is also important, and throughout the gamut of SDG indicators, there is a call for data disaggregation, across gender, across race, across geographical location, and several other variables. So that is important to understand, that it is an ambitious data agenda, but then this is what the whole framework is about. Perhaps that is. I wanted also to take on the question, relating to environmental information. UNESCO, as part of its work in this area, developed a briefing note, which in fact incorporates the aspects of human rights information and environmental information as unique in themselves, and that actually laws providing for access to information must cater explicitly for those under the framework of the Paris Agreement, for example.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. I'd ask Laura to tell us what you're going to take away from this, or any other feedback from the perspective of the Access to Information Working Group. Oh, Marius, you wanted to say something. I was asking for teamwork. It's fine.
I will be very quick, 30
very brief,
seconds.
Because we've got 2.5 minutes
just
left.
Adding to a few, one more thing we were discussing international legal instruments here, and there are more than I've mentioned, of course, but one very important source of fora is Universal Periodic Review, which is being done every 3 years in Geneva by Human Rights Council, and access to information or freedom of information is part of it, so that is another avenue to influence and to cooperate. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marius and Faxon.
Great. Just really quickly, because we only have about a minute left. I think not only are we hearing that we need different types of measurements, but also that they reach different constituencies. And that's a little bit going back to what you were talking about, Suzanne. And so we need to think through, as we talk about measurement, who is it for, and why do we do it, and who's our constituency? And I think that's why, for example, our implementation assessment tool is so granular, because we want it to be able to give you that evidence of where agencies are doing well, where they're progressing, but also where they're stalling. Because it's with that that you can do the oversight. We as civil society can monitor and push, and they can learn how to move forward. So again, I'm really concerned that we take the lowest common denominator and say, let's come up with 10 questions or 10 indicators, and to who does that really serve? Does that really move us forward as a community to advancing a true right to information? On the gender question, phenomenal question, the Carter Center has developed a programming around it. We did 3 studies with over 1,700 interviews to demonstrate that women aren't able to access the right to information as men do. It's a very gendered issue, and recognizing that, Helen and I and others worked very hard to get the word marginalized populations and women into the Paris Declaration. Because again, we're doing nobody any good if we continue to only cater to the elite. They already have access to information. We want it to get it to the people who right now are excluded from those information flows. And finally, on the question of eligibility, we are going to add your voice to that of the panel that we did before, because we completely agree that to get a point because you have an intention or a draft law that could be 1 sentence shouldn't get you in the door of the Open Government Partnership.
Okay, well, thank you very much to everybody. Just a couple of words to wrap up. This is clearly, and I think what this panel has demonstrated, is quite how complex this is. Given, particularly in this, okay, I've got it. We're almost there. Particularly in these very complex political times, the right of access to information is an essential democratic right. To know where we stand with it, we need to do complex measuring. Going forward, certainly Laura and I will take this forward, and other people who are engaged in the heart of OGP will take this forward. Everyone in this room, whether you come from government, from civil society, or an information commissioner, you can get your organization or body to sign up to the optional commitment under the action plan. Number 6 in the Paris Declaration, It can be signed by governments, civil society, information commissioners, etc. So get engaged in taking this conversation forward. All my co-panelists, I'm sure, will be doing that, and I encourage everyone else to do it as well. Huge round of applause for the people sitting up here on the stage. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.